Firstly, thank you very much for joining us today. And I think it's really nice to have you and know about what you guys are doing there. Uh, I would like to welcome our speakers as well for taking their time and joining us. I would just briefly start out with telling what Bpsp is doing. And I don't want to take much time here, but I would like to give as much time to speakers as possible. Just to give you a general idea, Vpap has been trying to foster the entrepreneurial spirit at Berkeley, particularly with regard to postdoctoral candidates, trying to encourage them to come up with startup ideas and try to build these startups out of the research that they have been doing in there. So that's probably the, let's say, in a summary of what BPEP has been doing, trying to get the lab into the, let's say, the market. That's kind of what we are support in a way. So these are the members of the BPEP. So of course, many of you might know Naresh already. Sri is presently in India, so probably is not joining. It's too early for him in the morning. Saad, Alex, Tadis, and Hyunjin, and myself. So we are the ones who are helping out with the BPEP. So this is also the BPEP team who has been supporting us from the QB3, from the VSPA, and various other aspects of UC Berkeley, from Haas Business School and so on. I mean, so that's been the, let's say, the advisory team of BPEP who has been, let's say, giving us a lot of support and let's say encouragement from the Berkeley side of things to keep things moving along. And I would also, let's say, special thanks to VSPA and Vice Chancellor of Research, Bakar Fellows, and Skydeck as well for supporting most of our programs. I'm keeping this short here. I don't want to take much of the time. I would like to focus more on the speakers. The first speaker would be Dr. Prasad Sunkara. He's the chairman of Life Science Committee at Tech Coast Angels. He's a seasoned CEO, accomplished scientist, and serial entrepreneur. And he has been a successful investor. And he has helped build several startup companies in the life sciences area and has been hiring great talent for several years now. He has more than 35 years of experience, and I would give him the stage to take over from here. Thank you very much, Dr. Sunkara, for joining us today. We are looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Naresh and Ajay, for the invitation. And just briefly, thanks for that kind of introduction too. Just to put the perspective, I was like you guys about, I would say, maybe 40 years ago. I was a junior faculty at MD Anderson Cancer Center, a postdoc there, then became an assistant professor. And then I was recruited into a big pharma, and I was there for 13 years. I wish I had only there for 5 years, but it was a good ride and I learned a lot of stuff, but I got fed up after after a while, after about 5 years, the bureaucracy, maybe more so 10 years, I would say. But it's hard to take a risk when you have family, and those days the salaries are not that big, but so it took me almost 13 years to take a jump into the biotech, the startup world. So I moved out of a company at the time called Marion Merrell Dow Pharmaceuticals, which is now part of Sanofi Aventis. I became a director of cancer biology, drug discovery, and preclinical development, but I just wanted to learn more about preclinical and clinical development, which is very hard in a move into in a big pharma, because they put you into these pigeonholes. You're a discovery guy, not a development guy or whatever, right? So anyway, I moved out into a biotech world and moved to San Diego. It was at that time was a company called Neurocrine Biosciences. That my first taste of biotech, and I learned so much in 4 years in that company. I was like one of the early employees, director of product development, which means I was involved in not only discovery, working with the discovery, taking them into preclinical development and clinical development. And then I had another opportunity after about 4 years. That company went public, and I had an opportunity to join another company as a vice president And that company after 2 years, those are heydays. It's not because we were that great, but biotech in 90s, was like I would say now the SaaS, the software companies are, you probably heard a lot about the companies in the Bay Area. So they were like that at those days. And so after 2 years that was acquired, then I became an executive VP of another biotech company. So all I'm trying to say is I was in your shoes at one point, and then what is exciting for you is I had to wait for 13 years or 15 years to get into startup world. But it's a great opportunity for you. I think things are a lot better. If you start early in your career, then it's better than coming to a port from academia into kind of a startup or industry. So I think you're in a great right direction, I would say. If you can start early, I'm sure, if you win, that's great. Even if you don't win in the first one or two companies, you learn a lot. So, and then after that, I started my own biotech companies. So the third company was bought out in 2003. Actually, I moved from La Jolla to Ann Arbor, Michigan. It was, people were wondering, why am I crazy to move to Ann Arbor from San Diego? But it worked out well. I started a company with a couple of professors, our own. And then we really didn't raise any money from outside. And I made into a biotech holding company of 4 companies. And then eventually we exited after about 5 years of 2 companies. And then I stayed back in Ann Arbor because there were a lot of opportunities so I was involved in 2 other startups as CEO. And when the last company was acquired, I decided to move back to San Diego. So now for the past 5 years, I've been actively working with TCA, which is the Tech Coast Angels. You probably have to know about us. If not already, you should keep a track of, or at least keep in mind when you are coming to raise your pre-seed or seed funding, because we're the probably the largest and the most active angel group in the country. So in the last 5 years, I was a very active member in the life science group. And about 3 years ago, they elected me as the chair for the life science investing. So I in San Diego. So just to give you a brief idea about TCA, TCA is about close to about like you can see, has been there from 97, but I think it's more active in the last, I would say, the 20 years. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, TCA changed quite a bit. Even when I was, when I joined TCA about 5 years ago, it was more like a social club. People, retired executives and all, they used to meet once a month, and there was an arduous process of screening, and they have 3 different meetings at dinner. People have the CEOs looking for funding, how to attend the dinner. So it was a slow process. So when I first joined, I felt, is it worth my time and money to be involved in this? But things have changed. And so like it says, we invested about 255 million in 415 startups. But in the last 5 years itself, we probably invested as much as, actually last 3 years, as much as 50 to 55 million in about, I would say, close to 120 companies. So we have been very active in the last 3 years. We formed just to let me tell you about TCA, and then I'll come to the San Diego. So TCA has close to about 500 members. We have 4 chapters. There is a Los Angeles chapter, Orange County. We are Southern California focus, and then Inland Empire. But San Diego is the biggest with more than 250 members, and it is the leading chapter in the TCA. And just to give you an idea, this year, 2020, so we started raising the sidecar fund in 19, and then the first fund was 2.2 million, where people invest, all the members would put in certain amount of money each, and then we pool that money, and then we not only we invest from that money, but also individuals invest. Okay, and so the first fund was 2.2, the second fund was 3.7. The 21 fund we just completed investing last month was about 4.7. We're just raising the next fund, which is about we think will exceed north of 5.5. Don't know yet, but based on our interest, I think it's going to be bigger than the previous one. And so we really changed everything. We are not even before the pandemic, COVID-19, we became online. So all the screening, we have 3 different meetings. The screening meeting, and then we call it general membership meeting, and then a dinner meeting. But we still have them, but all of them are online. Before, and it's big. The dinner meeting used to be the social meeting where people meeting and socialize with the other members. So going forward, we'll probably do the screening all online. And we also decided a couple of years ago not restrict ourselves to Southern Cal or California, also bring in anywhere, as long as there is C Corp, US C Corporation in the country, we would be interested in investing. So now we have companies from East Coast, Boston, New York, and South, Texas, Florida. We entertain companies as long as they're, worthwhile for us. So our motto is TCA San Diego is a place for the best companies to come for their angel funding. So we are the other thing is we are very fast. We don't want to waste entrepreneurs' time. We don't want to waste our volunteers' time. So within 30 days, we guarantee within 30 days after DD process, we fund. And we, in the past, when I first joined, it used to be 3 months. I think there are some other, I don't want to say anything negative of other angel groups, but in general, the angel groups take their own time, on average 3 months. On the other hand, we do within a month. Once we screen and we're ready to do, we conduct the DD process, we invest within a month. And then we have, we have 2 routes of funding. One is what we call a fast track. So the fast track is we syndicate with other angel groups. If you got a DD report from LSA or Band of Angels, both are in the Bay Area, we actively syndicate with those groups or any other angel groups in the country. We do with the CRI Angels, with other TCA chapters, and with Rocky Angel Group in Colorado, Oregon, or there are quite a few all around the country. We syndicate. So if you have DD report, we quickly look at the screening. If you're selected, we take that, and then we invest a maximum of $250,000 from the fund, and then individuals can also invest. So in a fast track type investment, we do an average about $500,000, and a lot of those are pre-seed and seed. And our soft, or I would say, the areas that we are interested in terms of valuation is between 4 to 8 million is our, is something that we like to do. And we're also interested in doing pre-seed, something like less than 3 million. Somebody has an idea, they have some initial proof of concept, but they need little money, something like 200 to 300, or maybe even maximum 500 to prove. We would be interested in looking at that. And then usually we are active in the seed portion, where somebody has a good team, a proof of concept, a technology, and a proof of concept, and they need certain amount of money to get to the next level. Then we would be interested in investing as much as $1 million or $1.5 million. Okay, so the first one I said is fast track. The second one is full track. Full track, that means we actually lead the due diligence. So, and we give a DD report. And then in that case, we invest as much as 500,000 from the fund, and then individual members invest. And on average, that goes to about $1 million. So each company gets about 750 to 1.5 million. We have invested as much as 3.5 million in companies. And so we have those two tracks. We do about 4 to 5 full track, and then we do about I would say 12 to 15 fast tracks. So for example, last year, 2020, we did the TCA in whole, all the chapters invested about close to $20 million in about 60 companies. But San Diego, we invested about close to $12 million. Of the 20, we did 12. And then we invested in about 25 companies. We really have a great deal flow. I mean, I look at one other thing, the life sciences, we invest 2/3 of the companies are in life sciences, and the rest of them are hardware and software. Although, some years we do little more technology versus life sciences, but the overall life sciences is the major 60% of our investment. We do therapeutics, we do diagnostics, we do devices, a lot of medical devices, and then also digital health. So like I said, we do anywhere between pre-seed all the way up to Series A. But our sweet spot is valuation around, around 4 to 8 million. That's what, but of course, if there is a company that has excellent team and great technology, proof of concept, we'll go at higher valuation too. So we invested at a maximum valuation of about 25, for example. So anyway, that's about the TCA in general, and some in particular about TCA San Diego. So we want to be the best place for the best companies to raise their seed financing. We did about 11 million in 2020 and 12 in 2019. Then, so we did close to about 50 since 2018. Since we started this funds, we had before the funds came along, the sidecar fund, people used to invest on their own, which was kind of difficult for somebody who led the due diligence. They had to go after people to invest, find people to invest, whereas here the fund there, so the fund invests and other people can invest. So, okay, in general, the TCA, our focus is on the team. We really want to have, we want to bet on the team. And if the team is good, even if the technology has issues, then we think that they can get around and solve those problems and bring back to the right path. So that's why we believe in the team. So right now we're raising a fund, and we had today we had one screening, and we fund about less than 3% of all the companies we see. And we have, being the largest and the most active TCA chapter, San Diego, we get about close to 100, 150, applications. Some of them may be too early. Quite a few of them come through either through our members, their contacts, or through our syndication angel groups all over the country. And some of them right now we're actively pursuing, talking to, for example, talking to Skydeck, talking to some of the UCSD incubators, or even going into some community college incubators, because we think the best way to nurture would be at the seeds, very early seed, rather than when you have already a plant growing, So, and that's where we find the best companies. Obviously, also there could be a lot of failures, but with we just don't want to invest and forget about it. We want to be active in terms of guiding and providing not only the business aspects, the funding aspects, but also providing the technology expertise with our members. Our members are ex-CEOs, or our executives that have quite a bit of expertise in particular areas, So we really would like to be involved in those early stage companies, help them grow, and so that's where we are going, in the sense early stage. Another thing we also do is provide opportunities for folks like you, just starting out, thinking about entrepreneurship, but want to know how things go. So there is a great opportunity to be an analyst. So you can actually be participative in these, screening programs. And when there is an opportunity, you can actually help in terms of putting together the DD, doing some research in terms several ways, depending on your expertise, either the technology or the financials, or the competition, or exit strategy, what is the exit analysis, and things like that. So we always provide opportunity for people that are in universities or elsewhere, would like to learn more about investments, or even starting companies. So this way you learn by observing, by participating. So I welcome you. Please contact me. And Naresh and Ajay have my contact information. Please contact me if you're interested in joining as an analyst. I can introduce to our executive director, Ashok Kamal. We are all proud of Ashok. We think some of the things that we pivoted in 3 years ago is a lot of credit goes to him, the way we are doing things. And so with that, I'll stop, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Prasad, for the really nice overview of TCA, and I'm sure all the participants have a lot of questions. We'll reserve the question session to the end of the event once all the speakers have talked. So our next speaker would be Dr. Carly Anderson. She is an alumni of Berkeley, where she did her Ph.D. in chemical and biomolecular engineering. She is a principal chemical engineer and partner at Prime Movers Lab, and she performs in-depth due diligence into several potential investments in areas like nuclear, solar, energy storage, and so on. And she has supported several new fundamental technologies based out of fundamental research, and I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say. The floor is yours, Carly. Thank you very much for joining us today and looking forward.
Thanks for having me, AJ. I might roll the dice here and see if I can share my screen, if that's okay. I have some really informal slides. I'm gonna try it and see how this goes. Let's see. I want to give everybody a little bit of a flavor for how I got here. This is a question we get asked a lot, and there's so many different paths to venture capital. I think it's something really important to keep in mind as you go through the process, right? Because the venture capitalist you may talk to today might be very different from Prasad at the Angel Group, which might be very different from the one you talk to the next day. So for me, my journey actually began in nuclear power plants. So that's a picture from a very long time ago. The spent fuel pool really does glow blue. It's really cool. I want to emphasize that having real world experiences really helps and stands out and sets you apart as a credentialed expert. So whether that's in a Berkeley lab, or if you decide to go on and do industry for a little bit before coming back, all of the things that you do are building your story and your ability to get noticed. I was an early employee at Mosaic Materials, first engineer hired. Having startup experience is something that VCs recognize is very important. Like it's hard to understand what you guys are going through if you haven't gone through it. And so that's something critical. And for other folks, being on advisory boards and taking a look at a lot of companies was also very critical for me being where I am. So a lot of volunteer work with the California Energy Commission, Talk Rocket Fund, NREL, anybody who's looking for a reviewer. I think if you're thinking down the road that you might want to either start your own company or be an investor, that's very useful experience. You know, go be an analyst with TCA, all that kind of experience is very valuable. And so that's how I got there. Prime Movers Lab, I want to say a couple words about our firm because I think it's the best deep tech firm out there. I'm a little bit biased perhaps, but we invest across 6 major verticals that are listed up there. What sets us apart are, we have a very, we are focused on deep tech, right? We feel very comfortable diligencing those types of investments. That's not true for all VC firms. We do feel like it's an underserved area and a very misunderstood area. People think it requires a lot of capital, timelines are very long, adoption cycles are very slow. So those are the things you're going to bump into time and time again. And the sooner you line up those answers, great. But also the sooner you identify funding organizations, like us, like TCA, like others who are willing to, who understand that that's not always the whole story, the better. Science and service is how we like to think of ourselves. So we've got a very broad technical team, including me, and about 8 other PhDs, as well as people on the flip side who provide all those skills that maybe I didn't get from grad school. So we've got a talent partner to help with hiring. We've got a creative director to help your branding and marketing. It's never too early to start thinking about PR. We've got a government relations person. A lot of you are probably looking at government grants. Definitely helps to know what's coming down the line. And there's all these other support functions as well that I won't go into, but that's something to keep in mind when talking to any funder, angel, VC, incubator. Like, what is the value they're going to add? And is that appropriate for the stage that you're at and the stage that you're going to be at in the future? So for us, we try to make it so that capital is the least valuable thing that we can provide. Starting a deep tech company is hard, and it's not just about the capital. It's about all the things that go into making a company successful. So some of those things, besides capital and support, timing is so critical, right? So, and I'm sure you guys have seen like QuantumScape, SPACs, and all of a sudden every battery company ever has a valuation that they think is worth 5 times more, right? And so timing is cannot be understated. And if you understand the timing around your particular innovation, whether that's in life sciences or whatever, the better. Be in love with the customer, not the product. We see that a lot with technical founders, where they want to tell you like the coolest thing that they did in lab and how this is like this really breakthrough experiment that led to the right answer. And my partner's sitting over there being like, okay, wait, but like, yeah, how do you make money, right? So the sooner, be in love with your customers and who's going to buy your product. Tier your fundraising plan off of value inflection points. So what makes your company more valuable? Maybe getting that first letter of intent. Maybe it's getting a preclinical data package that includes XYZ. Maybe it's getting into a clinical trial. And think through, okay, what is the dilution going to be at each stage? What valuation should I be aiming for at each stage? And just set yourself up for success. Try to get the best team you can circled early, not just technically, but also people who know your markets, know supply chains, know the FDA. All this stuff is pretty, I think you guys probably all know this, but saying it anyway, just in case. There's many ways to fund a startup, all right? This is another big thing for us. Like, if VC may not be the right thing for all companies, right? Like we're the rocket fuel. We want to see, 100x returns. Like, can you be a multi-billion-dollar company in 5 years, right? Like, if you're trying to start a successful business in some areas, it may be better to bootstrap it. You should, going as far as you can on grants is helpful. There are lots of different flavors of capital. There's institutional VCs like us. There's corporate VCs like a Chevron. Obviously, there's angel investors, hearing from some of those, and incubators, and USDA loan program. So don't necessarily be fixated on like, I'm going to go out and raise a $3 million seed round right now. Like, think about how can you get to the next stage where your value inflection gets up, and how little can you sell for that. Just as a brief background for those of you who might be a little bit newer to the VC kind of spectrum, we're talking about pre-seed and seed. Different groups like to participate at different rounds. This is a little bit software based, but as you go to the right, you're needing more performance metrics, more stickiness, proof of traction, etc. Another thing to keep in mind is kind of this graph, which is really ugly, but I think it captures a lot of like what we talk about, behind the scenes, right? So there's how much progress for a certain valuation, like how much progress do you need to make? Like, how far do you have to develop the product versus how much like street cred does the entrepreneur have? So, at the top of that list is like, Elon Musk or like serial founder has had 5 exits. Like, those people don't really have to show very much, right? They're like, oh, look, we're working with this scientist over there, so give us 20 million. And they can pull that off. For those of us who are like more closer to just starting our careers, maybe it's your first company, having that SBIR needs a lot more, right? Like, having some extra points to establish credibility will help you get a lot better valuation for your company. As postdocs from Berkeley, like, that is a serious, like, that is credibility right there. So definitely don't undersell yourselves. Don't underestimate the value of a lot of those like kind of branded incubators, and Citrus and IndieBio and Y Combinator. All of those help provide credibility as well. And just pointing out again some of those what counts as progress or milestones. The best one you can get for a lot of these is a customer letter, right? Or a JV, or into a clinical trial, depending on your sector. But customer is king in terms of credibility, progress, all of that. Some deep tech specific advice. Talked a lot about, or I keep mentioning non-dilutive sources. Those are great. Sorting out your cap table. I think that's a common trap of people coming straight out of university or out of postdocs, is assigning equity retrospectively. You want to steer away from that. It should be prospective. So the CEO or the person who's carrying the company forward should have more equity than the professor who's going to stay at the institution. Like, that is a flag for us if we see a lot of dead equity on the capital table. And that's something that people may or may not talk about. Having those conversations early with the team, including the professor, is best. Talk to the Citrus Foundry people or other people about how to have those conversations, but definitely recommend doing that earlier rather than later. And be aware of other deep tech stereotypes. People are gonna ask you, what is your adoption time frame? Like, what are your capital needs? All those things that are around deep tech. Pay attention to that, and also like know who's in your sector, right? Like, you want to be the X of, or the Google of X, right? Like, and you want to associate with that brand, not necessarily the Solyndra of something. Okay? So just as an example of like knowing your landscape and the comps, I look a lot at the energy space. So if you're let's say you're SELA, right? Like you're gonna have the slide that has like, here are all the other people playing in the silicon anode space. This is why I'm better. Make it easy for the VC or the angel or whoever, or like why I can get better, and know where the bodies are buried in case they come up. Other than that, you know, being in a startup has a lot of advantages, obviously, over a big company, which is pretty cool. You can do a lot more things. I don't think it's worth going through this in this context, so I will cut it there, and I'm excited for the discussion in a little bit. So thank you all.
Participants have a lot of questions, but we'll just hold on to that. I think we have Matt as well joining us. Matt is one of the co-founder of SciFounder, and so he was previously a director of Y Combinator research, and I mean, many of you in the startup sector are aware of the name. He was also a founding team member of the OpenAI and has worked with over 150 startups. So he would be talking a lot more about what SciFounder is doing, so I'll probably not reveal that. I'll let him tell what it is about. So Matt, maybe you can start by sharing your screen, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
So yeah, nice to meet you all. Today I'm here to talk about SciFounders, and specifically SciFounder Fellowship, which is a program started pretty recently to help early career scientists start companies that could make for promising entrepreneurs. So today I'm just going to tell a little bit about that program, and then at the end look forward to answering questions after that. So we really started this with the goal of helping promising scientists realize they can start great companies too. There's something that happened in the software world in the last 15 years where more and more of the really great entrepreneurs are the actual engineers and builders of the companies and the technology of the companies, rather than the business people that were the ones working with the engineers to build out that technology and then manage those engineers. More and more, it's common now that the actual technology creators are the ones that really are in tune with the technology and able to develop it as far as possible. And so while that's happened in the software world pretty effectively at this point, we really believe that not enough scientists realize that this can be happening as well. And still far too few scientists really think about starting a company. And in the context of pushing their research forward, not enough scientists really think about that. So now this isn't really for all scientists by any means. Many scientists out there would not necessarily make for the best entrepreneurs, but a lot more would than are currently giving it a try. And this is really meant to be a program to help support those people and inspire other scientists to think that they can really do this too. So what we've done is create a for-profit fellowship program where we're funding early career scientists to start companies and then mentoring them. Specifically, what we're doing is giving $400,000 in funding, as well as mentorship from people like me that have been doing a life science company for at least the last couple of years. It's not meant to be like a little side program. It's meant to be something taken very seriously. So if you're in the middle of a graduate program, or if you're in a postdoc, you're meant to leave that and really focus on this full time. Ideal candidates for this are teams of 2 to 3 scientists. Those solo founders are totally fine too. You really don't need to have anything proved out to be able to work with us. It's really okay to just be starting purely from an idea phase. It's fine to have some preliminary data from your graduate or postdoc work, or it's fine to have a proof of concept too. I mean, that is great, but it's definitely not necessary. And the main thing we're looking for is that someone on the team really has the aptitude, we feel, to become a great leader over time. So someone that is not going to have to be replaced by a professional executive when a VC firm comes in, but a scientist that really has the aptitude to take this all of the way to actual full technology development, and hopefully to the point where it can actually make a difference in people's lives. So the people who are working on it are me. As a little bit more background on me, besides what Ajay said, I'm currently CEO of a stem cell therapy company called Ovid Research. We're working on turning induced pluripotent stem cells into human eggs for fertility purposes. Prior to that, as Ajay said, I used to run Y Combinator's research nonprofit. I was a founding team member of OpenAI, and I had a previous, more traditional venture fund where I was helping a lot of life science companies there too. The other folks working on this are Lucas Harrington, who's co-founder of Mammoth Biosciences, which is a CRISPR company that came from Berkeley, Jennifer Doudna's lab, and at this point has raised a couple $100 million and has done really interesting work around discovering and developing novel CRISPR systems. And Nish Bhatt, who's one of the co-founders of Color Genomics, which is a population genomics company that has also at this point raised a couple $100 million. And finally, Alex Schubert, who's with us today. Alex is full-time on the program in terms of helping with diligence and outreach. He did his Ph.D. at University of Cambridge and up until very recently was working at Genentech. And so one of the aspects of this program beyond just the money we're giving is really the mentorship. So one thing that we've found is very rare out there, especially in Silicon Valley compared to the Boston ecosystem, is there's very few people that actually have the experience of starting a company at these early stages, life science companies specifically, that can be very helpful. There certainly are some, and there's programs like Y Combinator, but there's very few things that really take into account how different doing a life science company is at the early stages, where there's a lot of research focus compared to some of the more traditional startups that are out there. So we really wanted to bring together a group of people that would very actively be working with the companies that we fund. And yeah, we also have a philosophy of keeping the team very small. We really think it's better to have someone you're very engaged with over weeks and months, rather than, you know, a famous mentor who you meet once and another famous mentor who you meet once, where you're kind of shotgunning around with different advice without them really digging in deep and having deep understanding and empathy for whatever problems you're going through. So this slide's just meant to be examples of areas we fund. Really the important takeaway is we're willing to fund anything that's life science related. We care a lot more about the founders than the specific ideas. And the ideas we really look at as evidence that the founders are thinking about it in a pretty sound way. Obviously, most, if not all, of the people we work with are going to be at a stage where it's too early to really know if an idea is good or not. And a lot of the most in vogue ideas, as they're developed right now, may not be the ones that really break through. There are much weirder ideas out there that are not popular that end up being really transformative. So we try and take a very agnostic approach as to what we're interested in funding. And so, yeah, really anything that can be useful in a life science context, or even tools for doing research, are totally fine as well. And just to recap the structure, so we do a very standard deal with everyone. We give $400,000 for roughly 10% of the company. This is using a post-money safe note, which is a version of a convertible debt instrument. And what we do is we do individual office hours with teams as often as they want. And then we do group office hours with teams once a month, where we bring all of the teams that we funded together to really help each other. And we don't require that you be in the Bay Area. You guys obviously, or I assume most of you, are in the Bay Area, but you can really do this program from anywhere in the world. We have a team that we funded that's currently in the UK, for example. As long as you have the resources to work on whatever you need, we're happy to support you wherever you are. The idea of the program is it lasts for roughly a year. Though realistically, we're going to be happy to continue to help you into the long term, as long as you're taking your company seriously and really pushing forward and trying to make progress. And I think the most important take-home message of what we're trying to do with this program is this is really about building a community of scientist founders that are able to help each other and be inspirations for one another, to really demonstrate that companies can be much better vectors in certain contexts than traditional academic contexts for pursuing really transformative research. Just when you can unlock the types of capital that's available in private markets, when you can have the strong team coordination that's available by, you know, not having everyone looking out for their own papers and their own publications, but really all coordinated together, working towards very hard specific goals, there's just more room to move more quickly on very ambitious goals. And we really believe that the best people to drive this type of mindset forward are the actual scientists doing the work, so long as they're capable of being the leaders. Because honestly, I just have this belief, we just have this belief that those people just care more. They care more about actually getting this research into people's hands and changing people's lives. So that's our goal here, to make a better community of those types of people so they can all work together and really bring transformative technologies that'll help a lot of people into the world. So with that, I will stop sharing and yeah, very excited to answer any questions people might have at the end of this. Again, really nice to meet you all, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you so much for the nice overview about the SciFounders program. It looks really exciting and enticing. I'm sure at least some participants here might definitely apply for that. I mean, I hope so. The floor is open for any questions. I think we had some very nice overview from all our speakers, and if any of you have any questions, I think this is the time.
While people are
We have a
trying to bring up some questions, maybe I'll throw in this first question. Prasad, Carly, and Alex and team, like, hey, what are the common mistakes that people make, entrepreneurs, when they try to raise money, when they come to you? What are absolute no-nos that some of these folks can avoid, should avoid? Take valuation, for example. We can start there, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. I can start out with quite a bit of experience. I would say most of these entrepreneurs are budding entrepreneurs, are training labs where their mentor is a professor. As you all know, a professor is a king of the fiefdom, right? I mean, he has his own lab and he brings in money, and he, essentially he dictates everything. So that's the kind of experience they're exposed to. And unless you go into a corporate world, you won't know essentially how to work with others. And then, I'm not saying that is exactly true, but you're trained to be, be independent and all. So the startups, especially the startups, is a team effort. And so you need to think about how you can work with people, how you can bring in advisors, stop thinking that I know everything, kind of an attitude. And then also, lots of these entrepreneurs, when they start out, they feel they want to have all this equity. Equity is very important for them. I want to own all the stock, but like the saying goes, if you have 100% of a zero value company compared to 10 or 20% of $100 million company, that's where you want to be. So, but for that, you got to bring in excellent team members, advisors, that would help you, in developing strategy, technology advice, like something like what SciFounders are proposing here, or trying to do. That 400,000 actually is pretty reasonable and very fair. Along with it comes all the advice, so you don't make mistakes that a lot of people make. So what I would say is, think about, don't worry about the equity. Think about how you can move the company from, startup all the way up to, a stage where you have achieved a milestone that creates a significant value to the company. So a lot of the early stage, especially the scientists that come out of labs, want to control, somehow. They think the equity, the stock equity in the company is very important for them. It's actually the team, the technology, the advisors are more important. Okay, those are the ones that will help you. Maybe Alex can, expand on that with his business model.
Yeah, just to say a little, two thoughts that come immediately to mind. One is, when thinking about the fundraising process, it's really important to actually run a process. So there's not an easy way around this. You want to be talking to many, many different investors and just kind of following a hill climb web to get to as many investors as possible. So for all of my fundraising events that I've run processes on, I've easily talked to 100 investors each. I have long Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheet spreadsheets where tracking interactions with investors and kind of narrowing down to the ones that actually seem most interested. And then within the ones that are most interested, playing a process against each other, to choose the ones that I actually enjoy working with rather than the people that I worry could be bullies and, just kind of not be incentive aligned with how I want to build my company. but then also will give me best terms. I think balancing both of those aspects are important, because ultimately I do think, to the point you were making, the people you're surrounded by are going to be more important than terms if the terms are pretty close to one another. The other point that comes to mind that's often a mistake of just setting up your company was what Carly said, of that, if you're coming out of the university environment, one of the really common mistakes we see are people that are starting a company with their PI and have just set up the company in an incorrect structure from the first place. And that's a real turnoff for investors. So specifically to that example, like a lot of people have this kind of subconscious problem where they still think of their PIs as their bosses, even though they're leaving and being the ones to focus on the companies full time. And they give way too much equity to someone that has been their mentor and still feels like their boss, but that won't be the relationship. They won't be as involved. So setting it up in a fair way where you're standing on your own ground is really important to do from the start as well. I don't know if Carly, you have other thoughts to add.
Yeah, loved your advice on running a process and being professional with the follow-ups. That's great. I think sticking to the script is another thing that we see a lot of very new founders do, which is something to be aware of. Like your slides can be a crutch if you have your answers just so and this comes from running a process and talking to a lot of VCs, but having the answers to the questions they're going to ask and the concerns they're going to raise, and being comfortable jumping around or just getting to know them rather than going through a deck. Since I think like people mentioned, the typical VC investment lasts longer than the average American marriage. So a lot of this is like, how much does the VC are they going to want to sit in the room with you, once a quarter or more often than that, hopefully for a long time.
Yeah, I might add that that what Matthew said about the PI, the professor. The worst case would be if he controls and dictates terms and controls the company, not only gets a significant equity, but also he wants to control the company. I've seen a number of those also.
Yeah. Question to all of you on professor equity. What is that warning level, and what based off of and what's the assumption there, right? So if you have a professor who is going to be contributing, Berkeley has a maximum of, I think, 20% time that a professor can contribute while still being a professor, versus a professor who's literally not contributing to the company. So for those kind of two extreme cases, what would be an equity package that is reasonable and unreasonable for a professor?
I just put in, just a couple of weeks ago, because this was such a common thing. We had 400 people apply for our first round of Sci Founders, and it was by far the most common problem we saw. So I wrote a blog post up on it. So yeah, I just shared the link in chat if you want to read that later in terms of how I think about it, at least. There's obviously other ways to think about it too.
I have a question kind of following up on what you guys said about identifying bully investors or picking the right team. First question, what do you guys look for as red flags in us? What should we look for as red flags in people in your position?
I would say reach out to all their current entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs tend to like each other, right? You guys all like each other, so they should talk to you and they should give you their honest opinion. So that's one good. That's probably the best way. I mean, you can also look at what happened to some of their previous portfolio companies if they've been around for long enough. Pay attention to who leads that sector or who's going to be on your board, because especially for the larger firms, the person on your board may vary significantly. It might be someone wonderful, it might be someone who's a bully. So that might take a little bit more digging, but it's worth doing.
I have actually two questions. One is being remote, like being out of a state, hurts in terms of fundraising from maybe TCA or other angels or VCs which are in California? And another question is, how do you recommend the idea of start something small and going towards something bigger in future, or it's better to start big and I don't know, but that is high risk? So I'm not sure if my questions are clear, but these are my two questions.
I can share some thoughts on that. Yeah, so I mean, I believe that it's increasingly possible to be doing a company pretty remotely. Like I said, we've designed our program that you can do it from anywhere, so long as you have the resources you need around you in terms of access to lab space, maybe access to core facilities for expensive equipment you might need to access. If you don't, then we still encourage you to move to the Bay Area in our case. I think you're right that investor networks can be more difficult, but increasingly, so many for SciFounder in terms of raising the fund to be able to support everyone. I did that entirely over Zoom during the pandemic. So yeah, just increasingly more and more people are willing to fund people sight unseen. You do need to figure out how to be able to get those first types of nodes in the network, so to speak, and convince them they're good and convince them you're good and they want to help you to start making those other introductions to other people. So that's something to consider as well. To the other points, I'm a big believer that not enough people start, kind of normal sized businesses, so to speak, rather than just these like shoot for the moon startups. That said, I think for capital intensive things, a lot of the time, like it's not necessarily going to be that much easier to start like a normal company than it is something that's very ambitious and hard even from the get-go. There's so many people that control massive amounts of capital at this point and are looking at things that are just, the same thing after the same thing, slight variance on them. And if you're proposing something like actually interesting or actually has a shot at doing something really breakthrough, a lot of the times you'll capture their imaginations more heavily than if you're doing something more mundane. I think that's true of both investors and employees that you want to get to follow you and build your company. So yeah, I mean, obviously I don't have any context as to what you're actually thinking about working on, but yeah, I would say like, if there's a version of what you're doing that you can already kind of articulate and see as becoming more ambitious in the future, it might be worth crystallizing that more heavily sooner rather than later. And that might end up being a helpful thing to do rather than, just starting like super, super small.
Hey, Naresh, do you want to go ahead?
Cool. Yeah. So I have an observation. I'd like to get some comments on this. Yeah, we've been running BPEP for about 10 years now, mostly around grad students and postdocs. And one common thing that stands out most of the time is like, these are technologists and they love the technology more than the markets. Any advice on all this aspiring entrepreneurs to look at the markets, and then when they talk about markets, there are all these models that usually come out from business schools. They're like, oh, if you're a scientist, come, we have a business background, we can form a company. Like, especially for deep tech startups, which take a long time to go to the market. Like they're early in the technology space. How do you see an MBA playing a role early on in building the startups?
I think, so for me, having a more than one founder is great. And when they have complementary skills, it's great. The question is always, how long have you known each other and what is each bringing to the table? So if you're considering starting a company, I mean, you probably have IP, you probably don't have to worry about getting scooped. Like I'd be over at Haas or somewhere walking around, and if nothing else, like testing out the ideas and seeing how they summarize things and how they would pitch that to their friends. I think you'll learn a lot, and maybe you'll find somebody who you really click with. Depending on which sector you're in, maybe you can find somebody who has like previous work experience that would help. I would definitely, if you can do that, just the add-ons are great. So somebody who's worked in life sciences, if you're in life sciences, or even, if you're planning on doing a direct to customer D2C business, somebody who's done something in the D2C regime, right? So that's important. And then like talking through, if you do decide to potentially form a partnership, like talking through what are all the worst cases and how will they land before you form the company, because that's something we'll ask about. Like if there's two founders on the call, it'll like, what if you leave, right? And the wrong answer is they like look at each other and are like, you know what I mean? Like, so, and if it's somebody that you're willing to work with, that should be somebody you can trust and you can have that conversation with.
Hey, Matt, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. So very interesting discussion so far. I was wondering, I guess related to your last question and answer, what is the usual order in terms of building out a team for these kind of companies? So like ideally, I guess as an engineer, I can always see, oh man, it'd be really good to have another engineer co-founder who had maybe slightly different skills or, vastly different skills to help build out the product. But at what point then is it more valuable to look for somebody more business minded or somebody more operational? Like, how do you kind of gauge that scaling up process and picking team members?
Yeah, some thoughts. Yeah, I think part of it is you need to project to some degree what the actual challenges of your company will be and where you're actually at in the process of starting the company. All else equal, speaking for whatever roles may be necessary, it's much better to be working with people that you have some experience working with and you actually enjoy working together. Again, to what Carly said, like picking a co-founder is like a marriage, and or at least it's another context, it's like a marriage along with investors, and you really want to choose the right person that you're actually going to work well together. Probably for most of the types of companies we're talking about here that are more life science or general deep technology oriented, having a co-founder that's going to be actually doing the technology development with you is probably most valuable. Maybe there's someone like my founding team for my stem cell therapy company. I'm not a scientist, but both of my co-founders are scientists. They're both reproductive biologists, one of them with more of like an embryology Ph.D. background, and one of them with more of a stem cell biology Ph.D. background. And the three of us complement each other super, super well. The business aspects, so to speak, that I bring are more just around organizational focus and making sure we're hitting the right goals. And there's all sorts of like, just logistics things that pop up with these types of companies too, like access to resources, access to materials. In our case, we need access to human material that's really difficult to get. So I spend a lot of time on that and a lot of time on recruiting other scientists to join our team. So it is helpful to have someone in the mix like that, but they don't necessarily need to be a co-founder. Yeah, I would still overall choose as the North Star of someone you really think is going to be effectively helping you with technology development in most cases, and ideally someone you've worked with before or can spend some time getting to know before you fully jump in together as co-founders.
Yeah, those are good points. I might also say that I echo the same thing about having a co-founder is a marriage. I don't know, essentially, do you need an MBA? I mean, probably not. But I would suggest initially, unless you have already somebody you're working with, but you want to bring in, somebody new, you probably want to maybe go and get an advisor who has experience in the space, who can help you not only in the business aspects, if you're leading the scientific aspects, but who can understand, bring in a lot of resources, funding, and like marketing resource. I mean, in terms of the putting together a pitch deck and all that, who knows, some financials. So that's probably the easiest way to do, because an advisor in the early stages probably, would be a lot more helpful, a lot more cost effective in terms of the equity. And then he can actually bring in other advisors as you grow along. And once, before you really develop a team. I've seen those kind of companies grow very fast. So that's my suggestion. If you're a guy who is starting out or a gal who's starting out a company.
What is the right amount of money to raise? I know it's a big question. If you're starting out early on, I know I've seen Matt put out a $400,000. Prasad at TechCoast Angels, the check sizes vary. But are there any guidelines of what an early stage entrepreneur should look at? Like, what is the pre-seed? What should be their milestones? And what do you value to put money in?
I can take a crack at that. It all depends. I mean, what is your next milestone? I believe in raising value based on achieving milestones. You don't want to be an employee eventually. You're an entrepreneur. That's why you're taking all this big risk. So if you go to a VC and raise $10-20 million, it all depends. Not only you're diluting yourself, but also you're having these folks looking behind you all the time because they're nervous too. They have to perform. So my suggestion to all these startups that come to us is raise just enough, maybe 20% more than what you need to get to the next milestone. And then based on that milestone, increase your valuation and raise more. So essentially, based on success, but again, there is risk also. That means you got to be raising monies. But if you're successful, you can raise money without any problem. That's my preferred way. But at the same time, some people want to raise big money so that they don't have to worry about the next round in another year or so. So, and the other thing I would say, I think Carly might have mentioned that the best way to raise money is non-dilutive with SPIR and NSF. I never done NSF, but SPIR actually gives you double the amount of money NSF gives. And there are a lot more, times you can apply. So try and raise money while you are thinking of starting. I have one of, like you guys, a Ph.D. at UCSD, worked in a chemistry lab with a very good professor, and based on his thesis work, he actually started a company with the professor. I'm an advisor to them, and I helped him through an SPIR program, encouraged him to apply. He got 2 SPIRs, and he got close to about $900,000, and non-dilutive. He hasn't raised any money yet. I'm telling him, go stealth and come up with a lead compound, then we can go out and raise more money at a seed of maybe close to 10 to do an IND to take into the clinic. So those are the kind of things I would do, So it all depends on what your milestones are. A SaaS probably doesn't need a lot of money. A therapeutics company might need a lot more money to get to their milestones. It all depends on where you are.
The one thing I would add to that is like the importance of customer discovery and figuring out what those milestones are. So I think if you're like, oh, I have this new material, I think it will be great for X. Like, what is the next thing that you need to prove to get a customer excited? And then maybe that's your milestone, and think through that. And you really get that from talking to customers. So can't, overemphasize the importance of doing that. That said, also keep in mind the street cred thing. And if you have never started a company before, I had one quantum computing friend who got $5 million just from being like, hey, we're 2 smart people with an idea, but in general, very hard to raise more than $5 million in your first round, the proof of concept.
I had a quick question I'd ask Carly. In your slide, you mentioned deep tech stereotypes. What are the stereotypes that we should be aware of and prepare for?
So the standard ones are, it takes too much capital. Like you need to build $100 million, $200 million manufacturing facility to get it built. Customer adoption cycles are super slow. Like to get into a car takes, 5-10 years more than that. There's definitely, coming across as too technical as a technical founder can be a thing, depending on who you're talking to. And so that's a little bit doing your research on the VC. Like, is the VC, do they have a science background? Do they have a finance background? If they have a finance background, you really don't need graphs in your deck. I would almost say it's almost like, it shouldn't look like a group meeting presentation. So those are some of the major ones, and then like watch out for things specific in your sector. Like if you're a microbiome testing company and you know what ubiome would happen to them, right? And associate, like pick comps. If you're doing something complicated, find an analogy that investors who aren't in your field can understand really easily, or find investors in your field because maybe they'll add more value.
How does setting up milestones for a deep tech company differ from a traditional tech company? Should we focus more on technical milestones?
Say commercialization milestones, if you are better, if you can. If you're multiple rounds away from your first product, if you're a fusion company, then you're going to be stuck with technical milestones. But if you can get, pilots, LOIs, those are better than reach X temperature, right? Like if I have to understand something about the science to understand your milestone, that's going to be a tough sell.
Okay.
I have a question building off of that real quick. Coming from a more traditional software SaaS startup world, that traditionally you raise funding for 16 to 24 months. So I'm sure this is different with deep tech startups. What do you guys generally expect when you're giving out money to these companies?
Yeah, so speaking for me, for us, it really depends on the company. Obviously, we're giving everyone a standard $400,000 for roughly 10%. We totally recognize, though, that goes very differing distances for different companies. So some of the companies we work with, for example, we help immediately figure out a fundraising plan. There's one company that we funded, for example, we've only been working with them for about a month and a half, and we're about to help them kick off a fundraising process where we're introducing them to tons of investors, and we figured out what are the milestones that make sense, how much funding they'll actually need. So yeah, I mean, it's a very, very company specific thing to consider. Your milestones are super important to consider as well, and what are even the sub milestones that could be interesting from that. So yeah, I don't think there's like an obvious magic trick here. I do think whatever you're forward projecting, it's always good to build in some padding though. I think thinking roughly 1.5 times whatever you're thinking it might take as you granularly build out a model is a good idea, because things will likely be slower and more expensive than you anticipate. You're doing novel technology development. So yeah, problems arise along the intended pathway. So prepare for that too.
Factor of safety, got you.
That is a great advice. I think 1.5 is a good one, because at least in deep tech, we think like undergrad and grad students and postdocs with living on a little bit of money, stretching the money too far. It might not work at a startup like that. So
I have a question. If you are planning to start a company in Africa, how is that? How difficult is like? How does that work in general? Do you get involved in those international startups in general? I mean, the figure is very, very small compared to others. But how does is there any kind of growth in terms of trends and
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to say with knowing more about exactly what you're planning to work on. I think the good news for sure is there are a lot more investors these days that are happy to fund companies in African countries. I think Y Combinator has actually done a great job trailblazing this, where there's probably close to 100 African-based companies at this point that have raised funding from Y Combinator and beyond from other Silicon Valley investors. So there's more and more of a pathway. That said, if you're working on something more hard tech oriented, the thing I think you need to look at are like, what are the types of resources you'll have access to that you might need, and what won't you be able to have access to? Because I'm guessing here, but I would guess for certain types of companies, a lot of the infrastructure may not be built out to be doing the type of research you need to be doing, and also access to hiring the right types of researchers or scientists for whatever you might be working on as well. So yeah, my feeling is still like, again, general heuristic, but if you're starting a software company in an African country, like things are a lot better than they were in the past. If you're doing something more deep tech oriented, it might still be challenging, but you're going to know your environment better than I would.
Yeah, I definitely seek out VCs that explicitly focus on emerging markets or focus on international investing. We have, for tax purposes too, we have a preference for the US or at least North America. And there are some funds that focus solely on different continents or have a specific arm. So that's something that, like Matthew was saying, when you find some of the nodes, they'll all be connected, and that'll probably lead you in the right direction, but there's a lot more options than there used to be.
Yeah, same thing is true for tax purposes. TCA only invests in USC corporations.
I just want to conclude like a couple of things that I would like people to take away from here is, one is the Berkeley Science Fellowships program that we have at Berkeley. So this essentially connects talented postdocs with the startup companies. Since we also have Carly, Prasad, and Matt here, so they're like really interesting companies who benefit from some postdocs working with them. I think this is a good program that you please do recommend to your startups. And if you're a postdoc at Berkeley, then this is something you could definitely look at to work with a startup to just get a general idea of what the startup ecosystem looks like, explore with them and things like that. So what do the postdocs get? Essentially, you gain some experience of working with some startups, get an insight into the ecosystem, get some experience under your belt, and so on. And what do the companies get? Essentially, it's like you're able to host a postdoc, which essentially means, let's say, probably a potential employee that you are working with to understand them, that they could help you with grant writing or give you some hands-on help and speed up some of the product development process. I think it's a very interesting program that that would be beneficial for both the postdocs and for some of the startup companies. So if there are any startup companies, please do recommend them about that. One other thing that I would also recommend is the BPEP job portal. If there are any startups looking for employees and their openings, then this is something that we definitely publicize with our postdoctoral community. Please do add in there and we try to keep it as much updated as possible so that the postdocs can also find some of these jobs in the startup companies more easily than a traditional hiring process. And the last one is for those who probably want to get into a startup and you're just starting up, you're a postdoc at Berkeley, then look at our BPEP scholarship program. It offers you entry into QB3, into the QB3 Startup in a Box program, to be more accurate there. So it's a very interesting program. It's the information is available on our website. I just leave you with the information there. So do go to our website and you can find out about all these programs that are there. And if you have any questions, please do write to us and we will be happy to answer you. And thank you very much, Prasad, Matt, Alex, and Carly for joining in today and for the really engaging discussion. And I think most of our participants definitely probably benefited from this. And I mean, I learned a lot about the investing ecosystem as well. And I guess most of you had left some of the contact details on your on the chat as well. And if somebody emails us, we would be happy to connect them to you. And please do join our next event. Looking forward to it. Please do like us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and we are there, and we'll try to keep you updated about our next events. Thank you so much, and have a nice evening, everybody.
One of the reasons we started BPEP was to, just provide that education. Like, how does this funding work for this workshop? Basically, that's what we want to tell them. Like, we want them to avoid mistakes because it shouldn't be a ground zero for everybody. Like, get a head start, avoid mistakes, see what other people are doing, especially in the deep tech space, which you all are, focused on.
Yeah,
that's the idea. And hopefully, if they have those ideas, if they're advanced enough, if they at least want to strike a conversation with you guys, this will be a good place to start that conversation and follow up afterwards.